Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Princeton, where in our open and welcoming community, we live our message of hope, love, justice, and joy. Whether you've joined us live here in Channing Hall or on Zoom or YouTube Live, it's wonderful to be together on this brand new day. And we extend a special welcome to our visitors. We're really happy that you've joined us. We invite you to stop by our newcomer table after the service so that you can get any information that you'd like about our congregation and so that we can give you a good welcome to you, Princeton. Again, welcome one and all. We have a few announcements. We're pleased to announce that at the last program council meeting, we agreed that various programs will be represented in our ushering going forward. So this morning, a couple members of our board of trustees are among our ushers, and then in subsequent weeks, there'll be different members of the same ministries serving as our usher team. So if you're in one of those ministries and you'd like to be a part of that, contact that person standing right by the door there, Lauren Foss, or email office@UU Princeton and we'll connect you with that information. Also, if you are involved with a local organization that could benefit from a grant funded by the money that we raise at our spring sale, then please consider sponsoring that organization for an outreach grant. You can contact Gareth Funkely for a sponsorship form. Just email the church office about that and we'll connect you with Gareth and he can take you through that whole process. Also, a huge thank you to Kevin Trainer and Dunbar Burney for operating our Zoom and cameras and everything computer-based for this morning's service. We are actively expanding who can do that so that we can offer Zoom for more services and not only in worship. They did the same thing yesterday for Blair Williams's memorial service. Thank you both so much for jumping in. And there's definitely room for more help in this ministry. Our wonderful seminarian, website coordinator, and increasingly in hot demand area UU guest preacher, Pauline Nijander, will train you. And your efforts will connect people who can't be here in person with our worship life, which is a wonderful thing to offer. Just see me or email Pauline if you'd like to help. And lastly, an announcement from our CUPS group. Halfway between the winter solstice and the spring equinox, we can trust that spring will come. Some folks call it Candlemas. Some folks watch groundhogs. We in the Evergreen Cups, which is our covenant of UU pagans, call it Imbolc, and celebrate by burning greens from Yule, knowing that green will come again. Join Evergreen Cups outside right after the service, right out there, and you can find out you can let them know what is helping you through this last half of winter and be a part of this really fun ritual. It'll be right out there. You won't be able to miss it on your way out of church this morning. And now, friends, on this holy day, let us gather in peace and unity, as one before the grace and grandeur of life, as children before its great and loving mystery. In this hour, may we know anew the holy joy of human lives growing together, so that this hour will imbue all those to come with that same gift. Come, let us worship together.
We light this chalice this morning with reading 657 by Sophia Lyons-Baz from the Great Hymnal. Some beliefs are like walled gardens. They encourage exclusiveness and the feeling of being especially privileged. Other beliefs are expansive and lead the way into wider and deeper sympathies. Some beliefs are like shadows, clouding children's days with fears of unknown calamities. Other beliefs are like sunshine, blessing children with the warmth of happiness. Some beliefs are divisive, separating the saved from the unsaved, friends from the enemies. Other beliefs are bonds in a world community where sincere differences beautify the pattern. Some beliefs are like blinders, shutting off the power to choose one's own direction. Other beliefs are like gateways, opening wide vistas for exploration. Some beliefs weaken a person's selfhood. They blight the growth of resourcefulness. Other beliefs nurture self-confidence and enrich the feeling of personal worth. Some beliefs are rigid, like the body of death, impotent in a changing world. Other beliefs are pliable, like the young sapling, ever growing with the upward thrust of life.
Our meditation this morning also comes from the pen of Howard Thurman. I invite you to enter into the space of meditation. I make an act of faith toward all humankind, where doubts would linger and suspicions brood. I make an act of joy toward feeble things, where life grows dim and death draws near. I make an act of trust toward all of life, where fears preside and distrust keeps watch. I make an act of love toward friend and foe, where trust is weak and hate burns bright. I make a deed to the holy of all my days, and look out on life with quiet eyes. And here in the silence of this sacred space, we offer these, the prayers and meditations of our hearts. May it be so, and amen.
Morning. I have fond elementary school memories of being part of an extremely diverse student body. It felt very kumbaya, to be honest. There were school assemblies exploring different cultures, special days to bring in traditional ethnic foods from home to share. And Martin Luther King Jr. Day was always a big deal. In that positive setting, I was proud of my skin color and my mixed race background. I really thought of myself as the embodiment of MLK's dream. I felt that my class was living proof that goodness does prevail. Now, the transition into middle school was like jumping out of a hot tub into an ice bath. When 13-year-olds from all over the district funneled into one single building, the pecking order quickly self-organized. The statosphere, trademark, that formed divided kids roughly along race and class lines. The popular kids were, however, by far the most distinct group, mostly white, well-off, very self-confident. I felt a mixture of heavy resentment and deep, deep envy towards them. In my freshman year of college, I mainly hung out with a group of Hispanic kids from North Jersey. The running joke was that I was the whitest person they knew. Now, I found that funny, but also a little embarrassing. My roommate was a girl who had moved to the US from India in middle school. And she confided in me her depressed feelings about the dating scene. She said that in India, she was used to turning heads, and it had been a really hard adjustment to come here to the US and feel completely invisible. And those, I remember her words, completely invisible is what she said. After college, she moved back to India and she became a celebrity. After college, I moved to Germany. Being so completely other, not just visually, but linguistically, in a country that isn't at all focused on diversity, it really made me appreciate America in a new way. Racism and bias are here, but at least you can feel that the door to equality is propped open. Despite heavy resistance on one side of that door, the other side holds a wave of people collectively trying to push it open further. In Germany, a country that I love for so many reasons, that door is closed. On one side stands indifference, and on the other side, resignation. In Germany, I had worked with a half Syrian, half German colleague who was born and raised in Germany. His anger and indignation at a lifetime of being demoted as other in that environment was really overwhelming. You could feel it. For him, there was no support, no sense of movement in the culture, no hope. How should he imagine his future living there? How could he ever realize his full potential? Today, I live a few towns over from where I started off in elementary school. The local elementary school in my town is praised far and wide. The only critique I've ever heard come from anyone is from myself and another mother, a woman of color. We point out the lack of a diversity and consider it a real loss for all of the students for so many reasons. Of course, when I've made this observation to other parents, they nod in agreement, but I wonder how much diversity we are all really comfortable with. I mean, before we would stop praising our school highly, before we would start saying, yeah, but the schools aren't so great. Before we'd start finding different excuses to move away. There was an incident this year in which our daughters learned that another child in class had said that they don't like people with dark skin. Now, an innocent and uninformed remark, no doubt, kids that young, they don't understand a lot of things. The mother of color and I spoke together and she told me, I don't want to make a big deal about it, but I don't want everyone to pretend like it didn't happen. And I understood her. We must push it, but also without being classified as oversensitive brown people. But why is that a concern of ours? I think of how that mother must, on top of everything else, worry in a different way than myself, how her daughter will develop a secure and confident identity in this school that is so highly praised. Acceptance is just like good health. When you have it, you are blind to its broad significance in your everyday life. Only when it's missing do you recognize its true power. Acceptance is connected to potential. It underlies basic self-confidence and optimism. It is freedom from the weight of resentment and insecurity. Being more accepting isn't all about feeling kumbaya and getting pats on the back. It requires a lot of empathy. And this means feeling personal discomfort, awkwardness, and humility. And I ask all of you here today, are you really prepared for that? Thank you.
In 1955, 4 high school students boarded a bus in Montgomery, Alabama. They took their seats, but were soon ordered to give them up as they were African American. The bus was full, and a white woman had boarded but had nowhere to sit. As 3 of their students gave up their seats, another African American woman boarded and sat in one of the now open seats. She was also pregnant. So now the woman and 1 high school student were occupying seats that the bus driver told them to leave. They refused, and the police were called. The police convinced some African American men on the bus to give up their seats so that the girl and the pregnant woman would have somewhere to sit. A man in the row directly behind them did that, and the pregnant woman moved to the open seat. The girl refused to move, however, following a lesser known but not unheard of practice of mostly Black women at the time, sometimes refusing to give up their seats even when demanded. They were usually fined, sometimes briefly jailed, and most of their stories live in legend and in diminishing memory. But some are known, and the story of Claudette Colvin is one. Among the 4 girls and 1 adult, she alone refused the lawful demand of the bus driver and the cultural expectations surrounding her and refused to move, not even a row. She had paid her fare, she said, and she had a right to the seat. She was arrested by officers who had to carry her off the bus for she refused to move, handcuffed, and taken to jail, where in her fear she began praying the Lord's Prayer. She would later be sentenced to indefinite probation and largely forgotten in civil rights history, even though she would become one of 4 plaintiffs in the court case Browder versus Gale, which eventually overturned bus segregation laws not only in Montgomery, but in all of Alabama. She would eventually move to New York City, where she would raise a family and work as a nursing assistant for more than 3 decades. As her story gradually became better known, she would give interviews and make appearances describing her contributions to America's betterment. While she remains less known than Rosa Parks, who of course similarly refused to give up her seat on a bus and did so 9 months after Colvin refused to move, there are now books written about Colvin and poems, and her story is getting out there. But not really at that time. Civil rights leaders then were looking for and planning for and strategizing around a good test case that would let them challenge not only the legality of discrimination, but the cultural ease with which it was broadly accepted. Colvin could have been that case, and indeed she would come to be a part of a very important legal victory for civil rights. But she was young, and leaders worried about how a high school student would carry themselves in that kind of spotlight. And during the course of everything else, she would also become pregnant. And that wasn't the image the leaders sought, particularly in the 1950s in Alabama and America. And so her story stayed relatively quiet for a long, long time, until recently. I was just at my daughter's middle school for a thing a few nights ago, and part of the evening took us to the cafeteria, where they have a Black History Month display that the students had put together. And several students had written bios of Colvin and what she did at an age not much older than those students. I realized that Colvin was covered in that display more than Rosa Parks, which I took to mean that people are hungry for more stories, more examples of courage and moral clarity, and that students are drawn to stories of other students doing great things. I imagine the students were introduced to Rosa Parks when they were introduced to the civil rights movement itself in grade school, and now they've learned Claudette Colvin, and hopefully that education continues. That idea that people are drawn to stories about people who are kind of like them doing great things came to mind when I read The Conversation, How Seeking the Truth About Racism Can Radically Transform Individuals and Organizations by Robert Livingston. The author serves on the faculty of the Kennedy School at Harvard and has taught at several universities, but he is probably best known as a corporate consultant around issues of systemic racism. He has worked with countless companies and localities and universities to expose and change cultures of implicit and explicit racism using a very particular model that he's created. So his audience is mostly corporate and political leaders. And in his introduction in the book, he tells the story of one political leader with no particular interest in racial justice, who ends up in one of Livingston's seminars purely by mistake, meant to go to a different one. After some hesitancy, the leader embraced the learning and this issue caught fire within him. He turned into a consistent proponent of racial justice equity and built that into his leadership at every level. He also became friends with the author and the author's family and friends, so much so that the author said that even the dogs don't bark when this guy comes to visit anymore. I think he told that guy's story because that guy is so similar to his anticipated audience. And we lean into stories about people like us, whoever we are, doing great things. We tend to stick to them, and they tend to help us learn. Colvin herself credits the stories of people she could see in herself with her decision to not move that afternoon. She and her friends had just been studying Black freedom fighters before they got on the bus, and she said that when she was ordered to move, she felt like Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth were on either side of her, keeping her seated. The strength of the ancestors would not let her move, and so she stayed put, went to jail, and was indefinitely punished. Or their stories, lived uniquely in their lives, became known to Colvin, who lived the same story in her own life. Livingston, the author of Conversations, is a social psychologist who takes deep dives into science and data producing studies around racism and bias. His work is systemic, strategic, and scientific, which in and of itself makes his voice a unique one in today's diversity, equity, and inclusion discussions. It's always good to have a diversity of approaches in the work of anti-racism and around building racial equity. Some people respond to data, some to the arts, some to law, some to theology, some to education. Most respond to a little of each and a lot of one or two. Some need more conversation than others. Some need more study than others. Some shut down when feelings of guilt arise. Some get inspired when feelings of guilt arise. And if we insist that everyone engage in the way or ways that we like, we narrow the partners with whom we can have the sorts of conversations that can lead to mutual change and mutual growth. And when we insist that everyone engage in the ways that we like, in tone, in language or word choice, in strategy and outcomes, we are probably being a bit hubristic. There are a million strategies out there. Who are we to say that the one we like is the right one for everyone? And yet sometimes we spend a remarkable amount of energy judging the on-ramps that others use to dive more deeply into racial equity and anti-oppression work. It's much better to just encourage the movement and talk about it with one another, to have conversations about it with one another, as Livingston teaches. And indeed, all of this social science and data collection and interpretation is directed toward building racial equity in groups which requires interactions and conversation. As he writes, social change requires social exchange, which means you have to talk and, more importantly, listen to people. His approach to anti-racism involves people getting together and talking about the realities of racism in America generally, and usually their workplaces in particular today. And he has a structure for this that has 5 steps in 3 categories. The categories are condition or learning about the problem, concern or do I care about the problem, and assuming the answer to that is yes, correction or how do I help fix the problem. And as is always the case with approaches like this, you don't just move through the categories once and you're done forever. You go back and forth, always learning and relearning, always building and revising moral clarity, which is the do I care about this part, and then strategizing differently as conditions and coalitions change. Within those 3 categories, he has 5 steps which spell press. P is problem awareness, which might be a lack of racial diversity in a particular department, for example. The R is root cause analysis, or why that is the case. The E is empathy, or do we care about this? In this corporate-centered model, this is the area where faith and morality may lead the conscience, even if not the actual language used in the setting. Centered in our faith, which proclaims that all are loved, and all are worthy, and all are deserving of just and equitable lives. Yes, we care. Yes, we care that racism limits the freedom of everyone, and it destroys the lives of many, and it frays the moral fabric of our country such that we grow in shame instead of promise. We love our neighbor too much to not care about racism. We love the stranger too, and even the enemy, for whom we might not feel love, is someone who is loved by the holy foremost and by someone, and should be treated fairly. We love the promise of freedom and democracy too much to not care about racism, for it is an evil that sickens the common good, and racism kills people every day. So yes, as a people of faith, we care about that, as do people of many faiths. And after the E in the press model comes 2 S's, strategy or what to do, which depends on, in his examples, on where you are and who is involved and what the exact root cause analysis exposes. Might be to rewrite policy, might be a particular recruitment model for new hires or promotion model for in-house development, could be anything developed through those conversations that he keeps coming back to. And the last S is sacrifice, or what will be changed to put the strategy in place? What will the group lose to become who the group wishes to be once that common vision has been set and articulated? I'm not terribly familiar with corporate culture, but in religious and the nonprofit do-gooder, often kind of artsy circles I tend to run in, if that vision has truly been collaboratively built and well articulated, often over and over and over again, the group will usually sacrifice more and more to make it happen. The vision of a few, probably not much sacrifice. The vision of many, probably much more. The way to turn vision of the few into the vision of many? Conversations, lots of them, and over time. And often, since new people are always entering the circles, similar conversations have to happen again and again. Onboarding is one way to express it, and it becomes a challenge in some circles when you have a group of people who've been at something for a while, have to remember to create new ways for newer people to get involved, starting where they are. Denominationally, this was a very, very valuable insight learned with the original Welcoming Congregation program, and for that matter, the Green Sanctuary program too. Both were denominational initiatives that certified congregations as being welcoming if they completed a curriculum aimed at what we would now call LGBTQ+ affirmation, or green if they did something similar around being environmentally aware and sustainable. They're wonderful initiatives, and both happened here at UU Princeton some time ago before I was even here. And congregations learned by the time that they finished the certification work, there were new people who weren't part of it at the beginning and they had to be caught up. And then they learned that a couple years after the certification, most of the program in terms of the education had to be offered again because a congregation is always changing. And without the certification as the carrot, it was difficult to build energy around something that for some had already been done and for others was kind of brand new and opaque. That's just because congregations change. People move here, some people move away, people become more or less active. Sometimes things like global pandemics happen and you have to redo just about everything overnight. The same is true with the racial justice journey of any group. No matter how far it goes, for it to be continually collaborative, it always has to circle back to the beginning, those first conversations again and again. As Livingston wrote, condition, concern, correction. I would term it sin, sorrow, and salvation. The sin of racism, the sorrow in what it does to the individual, the collective, and the children, and the salvation, which is what we create when we fight racism together. Claudette is now appreciated for what she did to fight racism when she was younger. And indeed, she never seemed to stop. In 2021, she petitioned that family court in Alabama to have her juvenile record expunged. The county's district attorney supported her motion, saying her actions back in March of 1955 were conscientious, not criminal, inspired, not illegal. They should have led to praise and not prosecution. The judge agreed, expunged and destroyed her records in December of 2021, and stated that Colvin's decision to stay put had been recognized as a courageous act on her behalf and on behalf of a community of affected people. And it's that perseverance that we can learn from in our work today, as well as a changing system that would one day applaud one whom it formally convicted. We can embrace that change as a little bit of good news, a little hope. And anytime we can find hope and faith in the work of anti-oppression of any kind, we should embrace it. Hope is essential for our own health, and it has to be involved to create healthy change. And the moral clarity of a 15-year-old who simply would not move because it was unfair and racist to ask her to do so. Her model begs the question of all of us: when shall we not be moved? From what shall we not be moved? With love strengthening us and hope guiding us and faith calling us to be just and good together. From what shall we not be moved, as was a child whose moral clarity changed laws and hearts in our entire country's history? May we be of that clarity and courage in our own lives, however it is expressed. Amen. For our benediction, go forth grateful for the moments before you, the breath within you, the people among you, and the Spirit guiding you toward lives of love and kindness. And go forth knowing that you are held always and always with everyone else by that great love of no beginning and never ending. Go in peace, and amen.